Ladies and gentlemen, we now begin our first panel, Semiconductor Supply Chain Resilience Dialogue, the next step in Taiwan-U.S. semiconductor supply chain cooperation. This session examines the structural challenges facing U.S.-Taiwan semiconductor cooperation. Please join me in warmly welcome our moderator and speakers, Dr. Zhang Zhicheng, CEO of Dset, Professor Chris Miller, author of Chip War, professor at the Fletcher School, Tufts University. Mr. Tarun Chhabra, head of National Security Policy at Anthropic. Mr. David Feith, senior fellow at Hudson Institute. We sincerely welcome all of you, and Mr. Chris McGuire, senior fellow for China and Emerging Technology at CFR. Mr. Terry Cao, Global Chief Marketing Officer and President of Taiwan of SEMI. Please join me in a warm welcome of applause to welcome our distinguished panelists. Dr. Zhang, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. It's early morning, it's Saturday morning, so thank you so much for everybody waking up so early and attending this conference. This is the first time of our Dset annual meeting. I was so excited that we're able to invite our distinguished guests serving as our panelists in this session. They've been traveling across the Pacific here attending our annual meeting. This is super our privilege. So this is a very, very historical moment for Taiwan semiconductor as well as AI hardware stack manufacturers. We've been serving as the epicenter for powering AI and in the coming era. And so this is the only the first page of the AI era. So everything is again so excited. We just wrap up our Computex week. Meeting with a lot of the CEOs, so a lot of the stock price have a kind of a good performance, but we still have to navigate this kind of a geopolitical landscape because the things is going to be more and more complex. So it's very again our privilege and honor that we are able to invite our distinguished guests here today. So before getting started of our today's discussion, I want to briefly share about our research findings for the past 1 year with all of you. So this is really about the Dset's Economic Security Research Program. We're showing the portfolios, what we have been done and what we've been doing for the past year and still recently. So we're actually a national think tank, under the sponsorship of the Taiwanese government. But our purpose is like we want to serve the democratic value. We want to supply these research findings for not only the Taiwanese private sectors and government sectors, but also for our allies, the companies and policy-making circles there in Washington, D.C., and in Europe and Tokyo, Seoul, for making sure that we can still dominate in the future in the era of AI. So we've been focusing on doing this researches, focusing on how China can leverage its own strengths and how China is creating its own strategy to break through the current export control by the U.S. government. Partially is about the external approach. We help with our allies and our policymakers to identify the black hole, the bottlenecks, not only bottlenecks, but the loopholes there. And so the Chinese, these kind of entities, they're still trying to use in the distillation. They're still trying to leverage the offshore data center. They are still trying to access our talents, equipment, chips, smuggled one. And so we do this kind of open source intelligence and methodology research and identify each of these kind of loopholes through interviewing engineers, interviewing stakeholders in this ecosystem, and also we do a lot of data analysis for identifying where is the loophole and where is the coming risks. On the other hand, we really help our policymakers to identify and to through disclosing the Chinese semiconductor and AI hardware ecosystem, because we believe that China is still the most influential, but on the other hand, fretful rivalries with us. Because China has been doing this kind of holistic, vertical integration supply chain. They want to indigenize the whole supply chain, indigenize the whole capacity from the rare earths to the GPUs. There is many national champions cultivated by the Chinese government, but on the other hand, we cannot see China as a single entity because there is a brutal competition among the Chinese ecosystems. So we also look very deeply into each of the provincial levels. We identify Shenzhen, we identify Hefei, we identify Hubei, and trying to disclose in this kind of stories mostly ignored by the policymakers there in our ally country. So in total, we really want to share this kind of narrative and stories and bring the information for our allies, trying to helping with identify the risk and helping to navigating the future and helping to create a feasible strategy. So making sure that we can win the competition in the end of the day in this grand moment. So again, so this is very privileged that we can having our friends here because Chris, Tarun, David, and Chris, also Terry, they're the long-term supporter for Dset's mission for the past 2 years. We've been meeting each other frequently, somewhere, in the U.S., in Europe, but it's finally that we got the chance to bring in everybody of our long-term support and friends here on this stage here in our hometown in Taiwan, and to share the message with you, and looking forward to this kind of a vibrant dialogue among us. Okay, so let's just directly get into our first round of a discussion. So I'm designing our discussion into 2 rounds. Each of the rounds, I'm asking each of our panelists 1 question. So you have 5 minutes to answer my question. So after the first round, I'm so asking the second round. And these 2 rounds, the first round, I'm trying to identify, diagnosing the status quo. What happened and what kind of risk that we've been facing in the current stage, about the geopolitics, about the onshoring America, and about, of course, export control, about the competition with China. And in the second round, we want to focusing on more about the prediction, expectation of the future. What kind of a geopolitical events is challenge our ecosystem, not only the political ecosystem, but also our supply chain ecosystem in the coming future, and how do we navigate this kind of chaotic future. So this is how we design these 2 rounds of a discussion, and I hope you guys can enjoy that. Okay, so let's just directly get into the first round. Okay, yeah. In the first round, so firstly, just the sequence is just like this way. Okay, so I'm asking Chris about the first question. It's really about you've been covered by Financial Times. I believe that's 2 or 3 days ago. You mentioned about the grand structure of U.S.-China competition. You mentioned the U.S. is always leading the innovation, but on the other hand, China is kind of leverage its own industrial capacity. It has strengths of scaling and diffusion, and this is a long-term in terms of this difference. It would be a fundamental structure for these 2 hegemonic powers competing with each other, and it's going to be maintain this kind of status quo, or it's like still competing each other for a couple of years in the coming future. But how do you kind of navigate this kind of situation, and what is the grand strategy? Not only about export control, but other policy tool you've been thinking for us, not only the U.S. but also the allies, to help us to win in this kind of grand competition in the end of the day.
Great. Well, thank you for having me here. It's an honor to join this Dset forum. My first time participating in this particular event. Before I answer your question, let me just commend Dset for now several years of extraordinary work, putting Taiwan on the map when it comes to the analysis of emerging technologies and security. I'm struck wherever I go around the world, Tokyo, Seoul, Brussels, London, people are citing Dset research, and justifiably so. So whether it's research that's been done on advanced packaging or is coming in photonics, I think Dset is an extraordinary national jewel for Taiwan. And so congratulations to the entire team. I think when I look at the US-China relationship today, I think both countries have a different theory of power. In Silicon Valley, people talk of being AGI-pilled. And I think the United States as a whole is pretty AGI-pilled. Our tech companies are investing hundreds of billions of dollars a year to build AI infrastructure. Our government is as focused as ever, I think, on both the power and also the challenges of managing AI systems. And I think China has a different theory of power. China's theory of power is based on industrial output. Xi Jinping does not seem particularly focused on AI. He talks about it sometimes, but he's just as interested in building battery plants or solar capacity. And if you look at Chinese tech companies as well, in general, they're much less focused on building vast infrastructure. The investment dollars they're spending are much less significant than what you see US firms doing. And so both countries have a different theory of power. The US is saying our innovation is going to win in the long run, and China's saying, well, your innovation is great, but if it's running in our industrial systems, we're going to have the leverage. And I think the past year has provided some evidence for both sides. On the one hand, the US has surged ahead by almost any metric in terms of AI capabilities, driven by the revenue growth at Anthropic and NVIDIA's chips. On the other hand, China has demonstrated its power in the traditional economy by restricting US and Japanese and other countries' access to rare earth materials and forcing President Trump to back down on his signature policy initiative, the trade war, last year, which is a great data point in the enduring salience of industrial output as a form of power. And so I think the next couple of years will be a test of which of these forms of power is most relevant in the world. And it's going to be particularly interesting in the places where they intersect, because there are places where they do indeed intersect. And I think right now the US is focused on digital AI systems of the type that Tarun's company has pioneered. But I think we're also going to spend a lot of time the next couple of years talking about physical AI systems. And when you look at physical AI systems, today, unfortunately, we rely to a substantial degree on physical AI systems that use Chinese components and often are reliant on Chinese components, including the magnets that were restricted last year. And so it seems to me that we need to both continue to capitalize on our advantages in AI, and the US-Taiwan partnership is absolutely central in that effort, but we also need to be realistic about the fact that AI will run on an economy that still requires critical industrial inputs. And that's a place where China's doing better and better every year. And despite Western political leaders in the United States and Japan and Europe talking about the problem, they haven't actually done anything that has really moved the needle in terms of addressing China's industrial overcapacity or China's growing influence in critical advanced manufacturing sectors. And so this seems to me to be a key area of focus, or it should be a key area of focus for policymakers. And it has been an area of rhetorical focus, but not actually an area of successful policy action in most cases. And so I think as I look over the next couple of years, I think we're going to have this test, a real world test, an experiment of which theory of power is correct. And I think the United States and Taiwan both are making a similar bet because of the close relationship between TSMC and the AI chip designers and the AI companies that rely on TSMC's manufactured silicon. And we should keep making that bet, but we should also not lose sight of the fact that we can't have an economy that only has AI and otherwise runs on an industrial infrastructure that's dominated by China.
Thanks so much, Chris, because Taiwan is, our role is in the supply chain about the manufacturing sectors. So from our perspective, we've been interviewed with this kind of stakeholders daily, and most of them mentioned to us like they've been brutally competing with their Chinese rivalries. So from our perspective, we've been identifying this kind of AI hardware stack. It's not only one stack. It's about thousands of different stacks. So, our private sectors has been in charge of each of the specific sectors, but they've been brutally competing with their Chinese rivalries, looking for the survival. So this is a very hard moment for us, but we're looking for, this is the grand challenge for the US as well. So definitely this is a very critical point, the issue for policymakers to trying to figuring out how do we jointly dealing with this issue. Thank you so much, Chris. So Tarun, my question for you is going to be focusing on the adversarial distillation. We are just launched the one reports project focusing on this distillation issue, because we know we are now using export control to ban the GPU advanced chips be shipped to China, but they're just using the adversarial distillation to steal our IPs, steal our innovations through this kind of an illegal way, but it has an industrial scale. So when you were in White House, I think you have already started to thinking about this strategy. But you are now in Anthropic. I think the position is even critical for dealing with this distillation issue. So I would like to ask about your perspective. Is there any physical strategy for us to counter the Chinese adversary distillation strategy?
Well, let me add my thanks, and it's really an honor to be here. And I just want to note, in addition to fully concurring with Chris's compliments to you all on putting yourselves on the map as an analytic powerhouse, I think it's rare that a small group can really move the needle in changing the entire policy discourse in the way that you have. So thank you for that too. So I will answer your question on distillation, but I also want to just respond briefly to Chris's points, which is, I think that if you surveyed most of the researchers at Frontier Labs today, they would actually say that they do not think that winning on software is going to be sufficient. I think they strongly would agree that we have to find a way to win on manufacturing too, and not only catch up, but they would say try to leapfrog. And I think the key question to me is, how can we use Frontier AI to accelerate advances in robotics and manufacturing? And that is beginning to happen now. At Anthropic, for example, some of my colleagues have found they're able to use some of our frontier models to, within 15 minutes and really no special training, control robots in fairly impressive ways. So I don't want to suggest this is going to be fast, but I think there are probably things that need to be done on the policy front, but also just within labs to invest in this area, because the world of nanobots won't happen on its own. But I think there's a lot of potential there that's probably not adequately been explained or addressed by a number of the labs. On distillation, I think we tend to focus more on what can be done at the endpoint. Just what can be done when you see distillation happening, distillation attacks happening. And for example, what more can we do to invest in technologies and safeguards to detect and disrupt that? And we are doing that, and so are some of our colleagues at other frontier labs as well. And that's very important. And the systematic nature of this is quite important. We've reported that something on the order of more than 16 million engagements and more than 20,000 actors engaged in some of these efforts. But I do think it's important to note that there's a front door as well. And to date, Anthropic's the only company that has closed the front door, in the sense that via Singapore, Chinese hyperscalers have front door access to these models. And the scale of engagement I just mentioned on distillation could happen in a matter of a few weeks through the front door. And that's something that we've really not discussed yet. I hope that we do, if we are concerned about, for example, the potential risks of powerful models in cyberspace. And we'll be talking about biological capabilities and risks very soon, probably at the same pitch as well. So hopefully that's something that we can address more frontally. But beyond that, I think when we talk about distillation, we also don't focus enough on the other aspects of the technology competition that I know colleagues will speak about today, which is, yes, you can try to steal the recipe, but you still need a kitchen. And so here, all the questions about remote access, about smuggling, and about chip controls are crucial. In fact, they're probably more important than the things we can do at the endpoint and maybe even at the front door model access level to prevent not just the distillation, but also then the diffusion of the results of that distillation as well.
Thanks so much, Tarun. We believe we need more kind of a systematic collaboration between Taiwan and the U.S. because, on the other hand, because we just launched our distillation project, we started to identify there's an ecosystem emerged there in the region what you mentioned, and there's a new stakeholders, there's a new business model, there's a new supply chain, and there's a new things that we got to identify and need us to collaborate with each other. And we're looking forward to the new collaboration between us and you. So okay, let's get into David. Okay, so the question for David, because you serve this administration, so I think this is a kind of challenging moment for Taiwan to navigate our relations with the current administration there in the White House. So we will, looking for your advice and looking for your thoughts on especially this. How do we navigate the Trump 2.0 era, especially focusing on tech policy? Right? It's like, how does Trump 2.0 actually make China tech policy decisions? What is like to stay consistent, and what could change quickly? What signals should allies watch most closely? And do you see, especially after Trump-Xi summit, do you see this as a temporary pause or a real strategic shift of the White House's standpoint on China and technology competition?
Great. Well, thank you, Jeremy, and I will certainly add my kudos and real admiration to Dset for what the team and its supporters have built in a small number of years. It's really impressive, and it's been impressively on display in the last few days for your visitors here. So thank you for it. I think on the question of where the Trump administration is today and what some of the differences and similarities are with where U.S. policy has been, say, over the last 10 years, including in the first Trump administration, I think that there are really important aspects on both sides of the similarity and difference divide. There are differences that have been noted in the posture and the rhetoric and the policy of the second Trump administration from the first. I think it is certainly true that there are aspects of what the first Trump administration set out to do on China policy, including aspects that carried forward during the Biden administration in ways that were quite significant and often surprising for governments and markets around the world in suggesting the degree of bipartisan shared concern that there is in Washington and the relative degree of policy harmony on China between a first Trump administration and then a Biden administration that were different in so many ways, but they had certain notable and important similarities on China. I think that we have seen in some areas less continuity from that record of the previous 8 years from the second Trump administration over the last 16 months than many people expected. We have seen, for example, from the second Trump administration, less of a focus on export control expansion, less of a focus of certain import controls that might have been expected and might be advisable on Chinese technology and hardware coming into the United States. Somewhat less focus on investment restrictions, both on China's ability to acquire assets in the United States and the ability of US investors and corporations to continue investing in advanced technology areas in China. Not only in AI and semiconductors and quantum, but in biotechnology, for example. These are significant areas of policy shift or policy softening. But I think it's also the case that there is an important degree of continuity in Washington. Certainly, if you look at the Congress and at thinking about China in general in the US policy and political environments, but also even in the second Trump administration, where aspects of a kind of fundamentally competitive posture that the Trump administration set out for the first time between 2017 and 2021 and were really novel, surprising, in certain ways controversial, most of that is now the baseline in US thinking. And that hasn't really changed in the second Trump administration, notwithstanding these other shifts. So you see, for example, that while President Trump is not so focused on areas like expanding export controls, a subject I'm sure we will get into further on this panel, those areas where he is deeply focused and his administration is deeply focused have a very significant China competitive aspect and real significance for Taiwan and the US-Taiwan relationship. Areas like AI dominance, which is explained by the administration in terms of competing with and winning over China in the AI contest. Whether it's described as a race or something else we can get into, but it's described fundamentally in China competitive terms. Reindustrialization and resilient supply chains, seeing that the United States and its allies are not dependent on China for critical minerals and in principle other areas too. I think there's a lot more that the US administration needs to be doing, not just on critical minerals, but on pharmaceutical supply chains, on other critical supply chains that are becoming major problems like legacy semiconductors, where we are at enormous risk of becoming dependent on China. But it is an absolute priority for the administration and one that has a clear China competitive aspect. And then finally, and I'll stop here in a moment, there is the matter of deterrence and of ensuring peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait here in the region. And there, I think, we can return to questions of exactly where was the effects of the summit on those issues. But I think actually most of the major fears about the summit, that President Trump would make in Beijing with Xi Jinping a change in US declaratory policy, or sign up for some kind of a grand bargain, possibly over Iran or possibly over other issues, we saw none of that. Right? So US policy didn't change in the conversations that the president had with Xi Jinping in Beijing. I think questions of arms sales are important. Questions around their possible delay are certainly important. And there are things that the US and Taiwan can do together to shore up deterrence, to both invest in our shared defense. But they're still happening in an environment of a lot of long-term continuity in US thinking on China and on the importance of the US-Taiwan relationship.
Thank you so much, David. So I believe the last part you mentioned is the most critical part. Most of our audience want to hear from you. So I'm going to give you the chance for the second round for focusing on this after summit issue, and also like to hear about your advice for our policymakers on how to dealing with this situation in the future. Then, Chris, firstly, I want to welcome you the first time visiting Taiwan.
Yes.
And maybe you can share with you about your perception about how your experience in Taiwan. What's about that? And also, but my question for you is because you worked with Tarun during Biden administration, and both you and Tarun are actually the key persons for developing the U.S. export control regulatory regime in the past 4 years. But after the changing of the government, things kind of changed. And well, in the current situation, right? There is a lot of debate in the current administration on whether we should export, older generation of the GPUs to China, right? And since last year, there's a B30 debate, there is an H20 debate, and there is a H200 debate continually about this kind of a debate there in the Washington, D.C. Policy-making circle. And you are the leading voice for kind of opposing and joining, firstly, you are actively joining this kind of debate and serving as a leading voice for opposing selling the chips to China. Can you share with you about your idea and your rationales for our audience here in Taiwan?
Sure. Well, thank you, Jeremy, and I'll just echo my colleagues' kudos. Thanks for having us, but also the kudos on the great work of Dset, especially given the kind of complicated technical nature of all these questions. Having this kind of grounded analytical work is so important. It's something I try to do my small part in, but you guys are a huge part of. So thank you, and it's a huge contribution to the discourse here and in the United States. And it goes without saying, my visit's been fantastic. So thank you, and I will surely be back. Look, export controls are the only tool that we have to slow down China in AI. It is the only one, and they are working. Like you can see in the data, U.S. Tarun was talking about the U.S. models right now. Estimates are we're 8 months ahead in terms of their production. China's still stuck on 7 nanometer, which is a process that TSMC introduced in 2018. U.S. and allied tools are still 20 years ahead of Chinese tools. So we have very big fundamental advantages here, and we're in a really critical window when the very powerful capabilities that we have been talking about for some time are now here, at least on the US side. They're not yet here on the Chinese side, but they will be soon. And we have to be maximizing that lead and making it as big as possible while we're in that window. That's the goal, that's the logic, and it can work. The reason it can work is China is very heavily dependent on US chips. They make probably around 1% to 2% of US AI compute production. So that, if you look at Huawei's own roadmap, their chips are 1/8 as good as our best chips, and they also make 1/10 as many. So that's an 80 to 1 difference between the United States, or between NVIDIA's chips and Huawei's chips. And on top of that, the amount of computing power needed for advanced AI models to both develop them and to run them at scale is growing exponentially. So you have these multiple forces that are really working in our favor. And this is really the one thing but it's one of the things that we have the biggest advantage over China at. We, meaning the United States and our allies. Advanced chips are the most complicated thing in the world to make. It is a huge celebration of our joint achievement that we have companies like TSMC that are able to do this, like, honestly, kind of magical process to make these very advanced chips. Advanced AI chips are the most complicated thing ever, that are made by the most complicated machines ever, that rely on the most complicated supply chains ever. Like, China is very good at indigenoizing things, but it's logical to think that this is the hardest thing for them to indigenize. And there's a real reason to believe that our advantages on this can be enduring if we choose to keep them. So that's the logic behind the controls, is really thinking this is something that we have to protect for ourselves. Not only is it critical to our national security, but it's also something that we have a good chance of actually protecting if we do it right. China's really committed to indigenizing things. I think you look at this back in Made in China 2025, and they've been committed to developing advanced semiconductors domestically for well over a decade. But actually, interestingly, their investments are not that correlated with the export controls. So people say the export controls, cause them to invest more. Well, that's actually not true when you look at the data. Many of the investments came well before the export controls. We actually haven't seen surges as a result. So the idea that they've caused this indigenization, it's not borne out in the fact, it's not borne out in the investment. We actually are ahead. We're maintaining our lead. The question is, do we keep it to ourselves? So look, the reason that the controls, I think we have an 8-month lead and not a 2-year lead, is because they do have loopholes. I mean, Tarun alluded to smuggling, which is a really significant problem here and in Southeast Asia, especially Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand. The fact that there aren't license requirements for chips and you can just buy unlimited numbers of chips in most of the world is a problem, and it's something that needs to be rectified. Remote access is a big problem. There's no restrictions on China using US chips on the cloud. This is something that needs to be filled. And look, it also goes without saying that if the US is selling them chips, then that's a big loophole in and of itself. The logic of our team was always that you need to maintain a line, and you have to keep an absolute line, and you can't kind of have a relative advantage, but because you can aggregate large numbers of worse chips together to get the same performance, if we just move the line up every year, China will just buy the chips that are 2 generations old in very large numbers and then have the same capabilities as us. So you have to kind of keep it at a very low static number. That's the logic. Look, our goal here with the controls should be, number one, to prevent China from making, buying, or renting AI chips that they use to power their capabilities. And I actually would also expand that to echo what Tarun said. We also need to think about model access restrictions. I mean, if you think about the points that he made on reindustrialization too, the idea here is we're going to use the models to promote the reindustrialization in the West. But if they have access to the same models, then it's just going to benefit their industrial expertise over us, and we're not actually going to have any advantage and be able to leapfrog in that way. But the other point is that I think the core of this is our manufacturing advantage. And the reason it works is because we have advantages in tooling, but then that produces companies like TSMC and others. And those really should be these like arsenals for democratic AI. And right now, they're not completely, because we do see China still getting access to the products that are produced there, whether it's because of smuggling or remote access, or even any direct purchases below the threshold or elsewhere. And that's a problem, and that's something that we need to fix. And I think if we do, we can actually leverage this to moving this 8-month lead to a 2-year lead. But if we don't, we will maintain a real but middling advantage over China, and that's a much more dangerous world. The last thing I'll say is it's really, really important that allies align with the United States on all of these policies and also legal authorities. It's not a criminal violation in Taiwan to export AI chips to China. Obviously, it is under US law, but it's not under Taiwanese law. That needs to change, right? So we have to be pushing this so that all the countries that are actually aligned on this have the same approach, are working together on enforcement really towards this shared goal that is massively in our national security benefit.
Thanks so much, Chris. Well, so in the next round, I would like to discuss this further with you about what's next and how should we. Lots of things got to fix, and how do we fix that together? Yeah, thanks so much. So on the other hand, because we've been facing this kind of a situation for decades, because I think Taiwan used to be the first driven power for helping the Chinese. We industrialized them 3 decades ago. After these 3 decades of the era of globalization, and then we finally found this. Not finally, but it's lots of things wrong, and the Chinese is growing bigger and bigger, and then we got wiped out and replaced in each of the I just mentioned each of the specific stacks. So now we are running to the U.S. This round is because Terry is the representative voice here for the Taiwanese semiconductor industry. When we were just exchanging cards there, some of our new friends mentioned to us they are interested in investing in U.S. They want to bring their manufacturing activities there to the U.S. So it's kind of a new era now, and we see more and more voice from our private sectors mention to us that they are interested in investing in the U.S. But Terry has been managing this kind of a step for the past couple of years, as leaders there in Taiwan and the leader of the Taiwan semiconductor industry. So my specific question for Terry is really about your perception and your experience, like in the past couple of years. What kind of challenges that our private sectors been facing or faced during the process of investing the U.S., friendshoring the U.S. Yeah.
Okay. I think first of all, from industry perspective, high level wise, we feel like we probably deserve a little bit more recognition and also a little bit like empathy. Yeah. Like Jeremy, you just mentioned about actually from as a trusted global supply chain. We do understand the needs from the U.S., the purpose. You want to resilient and also reindustrialization, especially the high-end manufacturing. And also not to mention the ultimate gain is to support you win the final gain for the AI leadership position at all. I think most of you just know that the largest semiconductor investment actually is by the Taiwanese company. And also, we always talk about one of the largest delegates from the AIT, Salai USSA, is all come from Taiwan. So I think high level wise, I think we do understand the need, and we have much more willingness to go. So I think, and also in reality, we do make lots of the progress. So I think high level wise, I think we deserve a little bit more recognition instead of the discouragement. I think they will make the people, the industry people feel like this is the right choice. This is the trusted, is a fairly partnership we should continue to move on. I think on the execution level, definitely there's some challenge to work on that. From history, I mean, the Asian manufacturing, of course, people just think about cost. It's cheaper, so that's the reason. But this is one of the factors, but not at all. For example, I think a couple of decades, the young talent in US, they don't really want to do semiconductor, not to mention manufacturing. So even with the like a comparative like a cost structure, but the workers still have some challenge to fill in the US. And also sometimes we talk about the delay of the investment. It's also not just increase the cost in Taiwan, so that make the two costs to the two region to destination will cost equally. It's like that kind of cost probably cannot work or survive in US. So that's also one of the reasons we keep talking about kind of the very where we do the advanced manufacturing in US, but they have to ship the packaging back to Asia. So only few people do advanced packaging can profitable in US. So that's the in reality of the challenge at all. So I think it's more important we as a good strategic partner, we understand your need, we support the US advanced manufacturing reindustrialization, but we can sit together to really be candid and also share with you what is the challenge. And also maybe the big company, they are more get attention, but sometimes from US, you're looking for the so-called small, medium-sized supply chain. Actually, they do have the challenge in terms of the recruiting or even the business size. They're not big enough for them to really settle down. And not to mention they can have the order support. So I think to begin with, I would say concept-wise, we all agree, but the execution-wise, especially like infrastructure, talent, and also some even the law, we need to make some adjustment. Then we work as a team to support each other to make sure we can make the U.S. manufacturing speedy and also can win the AI competition. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Terry. For sharing the information, we also in Dset launched a project specifically focusing on friendshoring America. So we're using the methodology for undertaking interviews with engineers who are currently based in Arizona. So based on this kind of interviews, we really want to specifically targeting this kind of a challenge, as Terry repeatedly mentioned to us, executive level. And I think this is the most critical part to helping us to fix all these problems. So in the second round of the questions, I'm just make the sequence like backward. So then maybe I have to start from Terry. But I'm designing the second round is like really about navigating the future. So about this part, on the other hand, for Taiwan, because Taiwan has been running this efficient ecosystem for decades and decades. Then now it's kind of a challenge for each of our allies is asking us to help them with reindustrialization, and we are expanding our capacity into global wide. This is a kind of the new phase for most of the Taiwanese stakeholders, because they are very good at manufacturing here in their hometown, but they are not so familiar with how to collaborate this kind of manufacturing things in our allies' soil. So on the other hand, well, definitely there is a concern shared among the Taiwanese society and community that whether there is a possibility for the erosion of Taiwan's efficient ecosystem. For facing this kind of a discussion, what is the suggestion, what is the advice for our stakeholders, partners, not only here in Taiwan, but also there in the US? And what is the key elements that may help us to further foster this kind of a path, but without hurting or weakening the Taiwan's efficiency ecosystem, because we know if we got weakened, maybe China is catching up even faster.
Again, I think the industry understands the needs for the local resilient that purpose. I think in recent couple of years, I think the mindset of the supply chain changed dramatically. Before we talk about just in case time, then we talk about just in case. Before it's a cost efficiency, nowadays we talk about security resilience. So I feel like this is also part of the business decision. So for Taiwan ecosystem supply chain, that's the business decision. They have to think about it. Can they support their customer? Because we are so-called, we are the trusted supply chain to support the capacity and also manufacturing. So under that concept, so actually Taiwanese company begin to do the global manufacturing because of the business decision. Yeah. So under that, it's more like how we manage, how to make the balance, and how to control the cost and the risk, and how to make it happen. I think, fortunately, it's compared with 20, 30 years ago, Taiwan has a better precision and a much more knowledge about can be more efficient, or even automation, like Tarun just mentioned. Lots of the smart manufacturing can be adopted into the different country and the region. So at the same time, I feel like this is the best timing for Taiwanese company to go overseas, because we have much more better position nowadays. So it's okay, we pay some tuition fee to get some learning curve, even though there's not so like efficiency like in Taiwan nowadays. So, but we feel like this is still the good timing to do that. So by doing that, I feel like the Taiwanese company can secure their business, especially the market share, because you will not be replaced by the second source. At the same time, you buy the insurance and also dilute the geopolitical risk. At the same time, I think continue to put the burden in Taiwan in terms of the electricity, water, even the talent. I think that's also a huge burden for Taiwan. Another example I want to make is like no matter how Taiwan, we want to be so international friendly, but we cannot move all the US semiconductor talent like immigrate to Taiwan. But take Taiwanese company to set up the factory in Arizona. Actually, you open the gate for all the Taiwanese company can partnership with the US engineer or the talent can work for Taiwanese company. So I think there's still a lot of the positive when Taiwanese company to go global. However, in reality nowadays, it's more like a manufacturing side to do the multiple side adoption. So in the early stage, I think most of the R&D recipe we still have to work on here. This is in reality we cannot change because all the talent and all the mother fab, they have to run in Taiwan. But after that, we do the replication to around the world. I think properly by the smart manufacturing concept, like I mentioned earlier, the efficiency can be managed to some certain level. Yeah, of course, that is not the best, but I think the learning curve can be catch up. So I feel like this is the total combination for all the factors you have to take into consideration. But I feel quite confident in the Taiwanese company at this stage when they do the globalization, then still can manage the global efficiency to the level to balance the industry need and also for the security needs. Yeah. So in that perspective, I don't worry that too much. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Terry. So, well, the global supply chain, especially semiconductors and AI hardware, is going to be partially or more and more partly reshaped because of the security concern and security purpose. On the other hand, we are still in halfway climbing the learning curve in order to achieve the same standard of efficiency, especially manufacturing there in the U.S. soil. But that actually necessary, for us to collaborating each other again systematically, because it's not only targeting the specific company. We should, look at the whole ecosystem. And in Taiwan, and so this is a very critical issue in the next page. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to add on, maybe not direct, but a little bit relevant, especially the message to the friends in U.S. Because nowadays we talk about the supply chain concern. I feel like don't estimate the supply chain in U.S. Actually, U.S. you do have the supply chain, so that's why the Taiwanese company they go to Arizona. Why they choose the place? Because Intel already built the ecosystem, the supply chain over there. So actually, Taiwanese companies is leverage existing U.S. supply chain, the ecosystem. It's matter of, for example, everyone got the support from ASML. It's matter of this machine or that machine. Or U.S. do have the constructor to build the fab, but maybe not up to date, the latest advanced fab they build. So the one point I want to make, especially my friend to U.S., actually, U.S. you do have the supply chain. It's matter of the most updated or the Taiwanese supply chain. And also on the other means, it's like when we talk about Taiwan is full of the supply chain, actually the supply chain complete in Taiwan is a global supply chain. So actually it's like the U.S., Japan, and all the European supply chain all in Taiwan. So the beauty of the supply chain complete in Taiwan actually is not only the Taiwanese supply chain. So this is also the message I want to make the point. Actually, U.S., you do have the supply chain and also with the global support. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Terry. So let's get to Chris. So again, focusing on export control, but focusing on the next steps, because we've been witnessing there's several approaches has been simultaneously developed there in Washington, D.C. In Hill, there is a Match Act, and in the executive branch, maybe in the coming couple of months, maybe there is a new export control or a new policies be created by the Trump administration as well. So for information sharing, want you maybe identify this kind of a potential new coming of export control policy from the U.S. And on the other hand, also would like to you to share about your perspective about what Taiwan can help for strengthen this kind of architecture for the U.S. Leading the AI era. Yeah.
Sure. So you mentioned the Match Act and others, and I think it's been notable that this has been export controls on China, and particularly on advanced computing related items to China, have been an area of really robust and maybe surprising but notable bipartisan consensus in Washington. There have been a historic number of export control related bills coming out of the Congress, especially from the Republican-controlled House Foreign Affairs Committee. They have been very detailed and specific. There is now extreme interest on both sides of Capitol Hill in the very particulars of this policy because they see it as very, very important. And I think it was very, very close to getting export control legislation in the National Defense Authorization Act last year. There was a key bill, the GAIN AI Act, that was like literally the last item being negotiated before the bill went through. It ultimately fell out of the bill, but frequently what happens with the NDAA is something you go at it one year, it doesn't happen, and then the next year it does get in. I would be very surprised if we did not see export control regulation in this year's NDAA or legislation in one way or another. We'll see what it looks like. The Match Act is a very notable one. This one would strengthen controls on semiconductor manufacturing equipment. There's another one, the AI Overwatch Act, which would is similar to GAIN and would impose controls on GPUs. Match in particular would force kind of aligned US and allied controls on equipment. This is really notable. I think without U.S. tooling, China couldn't do anything more advanced than 90 nanometers. Now, it obviously depends on where you set the line, but again, as I said in my first remarks, this is an area of kind of really deep dependency for China, and the thinking is that we can maximize our advantages. I think this is. I've advocated for Congress for a 300 millimeter tool ban, I'll say, which I think would actually, we've talked about the legacy chip issue. That is something that would address, it would kind of fully block off the advanced chip problem and also solve a degree of the legacy chip issue. I think it's something we should be looking at. But anyway, I do think we're going to see legislation. In terms of things that we have to do going forward, I kind of have a list of a few things. The first is, this needs to be taken seriously. Right now, I think this whole export control policy has kind of been a little bit in the ether in Washington for the last year or so, and obviously it's kind of fluctuated a lot. I think the Trump administration initially strengthened and then kind of walked back and then walked back further and then strengthened again controls. I think now mythos is really changing the conversation on AI in Washington in pretty fundamental ways. You see this with the AI executive order that the administration put out earlier this week, which is a very different approach than the previous deregulate, let the private sector rip policy. It's saying, no, actually, we do need to make sure that models are not unsafe in some way. And I think that you will probably see a return to focus on export controls at some point as the key element of making sure what countries have access to this technology and how we can make sure that U.S. U.S. and allied technology are used to protect our national interests. So I would imagine you will see an increased focus on this. I think you saw, over the weekend, the kind of guidance that BIS issued, that there were some loopholes in the controls because of how it was not clear how they were being implemented. I think this, frankly, is evidence for why we really do need clear regulations. There have not been clear regulations for what this administration's policy is on GPU exports since May 2025. It's been a year where actually the written policy online and in the US regs, it does not align with what the policy the administration is enforcing is, but there's also not clarity on what the administration is enforcing. So this all needs to change. I think you do need to close loopholes on GPU control, as I mentioned in the previous session, previous question, bans on remote access, global license requirements to prevent, very large-scale chip orders. You shouldn't be able to order, $10 billion of AI chips without any, notification to the U.S. government. That seems like it should be a fairly basic fact. Tightening SME controls is another one with the Match Act, and then banning model access, as we talked about too. I think the United States and Taiwan really are the countries that have the two most vested interests here in this effort succeeding. The United States because it's the global leader in technology, and what's at stake is whether or not the U.S. is going to maintain leadership in technology, and Taiwan because the technology that China wants to get is going to be used to power its military in order to coerce or worse, take action on Taiwan. So this is really an existential issue for the United States and Taiwan more than any other areas, and they really need to be collaborating very deeply. like I said, I think that making sure that Taiwan's authorities and legislation and regulations are fully aligned with the United States is just of profound and deep importance. I mentioned the criminal penalties example, the fact that it's an administrative violation in Taiwan to ship GPUs to China, but it's a criminal violation in the US. There's no reason for that, right? Those should be aligned. It should be criminal here just like it's criminal in the US. There's restrictions in the United States on US persons and like US persons helping Chinese advanced semiconductor manufacturing. There's not that in Taiwan. And actually you do see Taiwanese engineers then go to China and help their advanced manufacturing from time to time, something I don't think either of our governments necessarily want. So I think fully aligning that toolkit and also making sure that all the associated provisions, regulations, legislation are kind of identical, if not stronger here, would make a really big difference, because this is ultimately the most important place in the world where all the chips are produced, all the servers are produced, and we need to make sure that we're kind of fully aligned in this effort.
Thanks so much, Chris. I do agree with you. With our collaboration between U.S. and Taiwan, we cannot, we cannot make sure that we will still win the future. But on the other hand, Taiwan is the first country signed a bilateral agreement with the U.S. that we voluntarily to obligate ourselves to align with our export control and FDPR rules with the U.S. government. So, but this is the next step we need to cook from your policy-making circle. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, I don't mean to make light of that. And obviously there has been very good collaboration between the United States and Taiwan on these issues. It's an absolutely critical partner, and that will continue. I was just trying to be future-looking. But yes, you're completely right to point that out. Yeah,
so looking forward to collaborating in that part as well. Thank you so much. And so David, so let's get back to the after Trump-Xi summit. Especially, maybe we want to focus on more about the strategy for Taiwan, because honestly, there is anxiety being shared among the Taiwan society. It's all related to the past of the military sale, right? It's a big amount. It's $14 billion and then be paused, and so most of us don't want to interpret this kind of connected with any kind of U.S.-China or chip deal with Taiwan. But on the other hand, this is a kind of a hard situation for us to navigate, especially, how to dealing with those matters with the current administration there in the Oval Office. What kind of strategy is more feasible? How do we more, efficiently to persuade, our counterparts there in the White House that Taiwan is critical and Taiwan is indispensable, but we need collaboration based on your knowledge. Because again, we appreciate your op-ed article released during the summit, and you mentioned you try to persuade folks there in the White House that Taiwan is critical. But again, for Taiwan, what is your advice? Yes.
Sure, I think that there are certain things that Taiwan and friends of Taiwan need to explain better about the current situation, our relationship, and the importance of especially our ties in semiconductors and AI. That's what the op-ed that I co-authored with a friend in the Wall Street Journal on the occasion of the summit tried to do, especially in underscoring just how enormously central and for the foreseeable future unsubstitutable is Taiwan as the center of AI hardware manufacturing for the United States and for everything that the United States seeks to do in AI. Lead the world, stay ahead of China, have economic growth in the future in the United States be tied enormously to a productive AI economy. All of that depends enormously and will depend for years and years to come on Taiwan and Taiwan's uniquely capable and dense AI manufacturing ecosystem. And so the argument that we tried to make was that what is happening in Arizona is extremely important. And what is happening in Arizona and elsewhere in the United States, where we've seen expanded semiconductor investment, especially from Taiwan in recent years, is notable. And in some ways, it has exceeded expectations. Exceeded expectations in 2020 when TSMC made its first big announcements, exceeded expectations in light of some of the very real challenges around permitting and workforce and other important issues that we need to work through together. And I really commend Dset's work on friendshoring. And I mean, these are real important practical issues. But for all of the success and exceeding of expectations of these investments, the US reliance for actual functional AI systems on Taiwan remains enormous and will remain enormous for years to come. And getting, certain advanced logic manufacturing in Arizona, so that we now have Blackwell wafers that are fabbed in Arizona since October of last year, is a landmark, but it should not be understood as more of a landmark than it actually is, because those wafers have to come back to Taiwan for advanced packaging. And there is, sometimes a belief in parts of the US debate that this onshoring is faster and easier and more advanced than it is, and that maybe in 18 months the United States won't need Taiwan anymore for the manufacture of critical AI inputs. That argument is not correct, and I think the US and Taiwan share an enormous interest in explaining that better. It is also the case that the United States and Taiwan share an enormous interest in making sure that both sides, including Taiwan very much since we're here, don't have catastrophic strategic underinvestment failures. And I think there are two types of underinvestment risk that we face. One is in the onshoring, where I think that some of the challenges in onshoring around permitting and workforce and much else could cause a restraint in the pursuit of the onshoring by Taiwanese companies and the government here that causes enormous political and strategic harm in the United States. It was notable that for the first 15, 16 months of the Trump administration, the messages from President Trump and from others in the administration were so generally positive about the Taiwan relationship and focused on the enormous commercial strategic cooperation in semiconductor and AI-related trade and investment. That was a result, I think, in a lot of crucial ways of how significant the investments in onshoring have been. The fact that people like C.C. Wei from TSMC were able to be in the White House in March of 2025, in the very first days of the administration, it set an extremely useful tone for US-Taiwan diplomacy and the thinking about Taiwan in the Trump administration. I think keeping that up by making sure that the semiconductor and electronics related investments and other investments, like in energy, really do materialize is very, very important. I would say, by the way, that the onshoring, the friendshoring, from Taiwan into the United States needs to accelerate in those areas where it has already begun, like in leading edge manufacturing, but also expand into areas like packaging, like PCBs, like legacy semiconductors, right? Players like UMC. We want to avoid having in a few years a rare earth style problem where China is able to coerce the world over legacy foundational semiconductors. And so the onshoring agenda, I think this is extremely important for Washington policymakers to understand, and there's an enormous role in implementing this by Taiwanese friends. The onshoring agenda should expand significantly beyond the over-focus, frankly, on leading-edge logic manufacturing that we've had over the last several years. But the second key area of underinvestment risk is in defense. And this gets into the Taiwanese special defense budget. It gets into the magnitude of Taiwanese defense spending and the types of Taiwanese defense spending, especially in areas of real asymmetric importance, like in drones. And I would say that these areas, by the way, also meet, right, the investment in US critical manufacturing in AI and the question of whether Taiwan will do what President Trump has been very clear with allies and partners around the world, which is increase investment to an appropriate level commensurate with the wealth of United States partners, and the security risk faced by United States partners is really very important. And we haven't seen that from the Taiwanese government, which has a complex and important politics of its own, but it's a real strategic risk in Washington, and that risk is acute given what is fundamental, and I'll just end here with a point that I think is really very important. Why do we have panels like this about resilient semiconductor supply chains? Partly it's because resilience is a general good in general terms. Partly it's because we lived through the experience of COVID, where we saw what fragile supply chains can cause in events like a global pandemic. But there's really one standout, singular, and overwhelming reason, and it's the ambitions of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party to subjugate Taiwan. And we shouldn't allow our conversations about this to forget that and to fail to educate ourselves and our voters that what is fundamental here is that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party have aggressive, hostile, enormously, catastrophically destabilizing designs, possibly for Taiwan and for all of us around the world who are so connected to Taiwan, including for our fundamental kind of technological and economic ambitions. And so I think that when we go through a summit like this, and the main thing we're talking about is, did the president hint that, arms sales might be delayed in this way or that way, and will it happen by a series of a few weeks or a few months? That really is important, but it is not fundamental. And sometimes these kind of very tactical, episodic events crowd out in our government debates and in our public debates some of this more fundamental point about what is really threatening peace and prosperity here. And so I think one thing that friends in Taiwan and folks in the United States and around the world can do is not lose sight and not fail to, frankly, challenge Beijing not to cause this enormous threat to peace and prosperity that emanates simply and singularly from their hostile strategic ambitions.
Thanks so much, David. Within this year, we still have to, witness in multiple meetings between President Trump and President Xi in the coming next couple of months. So it's still, we definitely want to hear more from you about, continuing to providing with advice, this kind of critical advices for Taiwanese policymakers and business sector as well. Thank you so much. Tarun, let's back to the model of what you mentioned, the model access restrictions. Well, this is because we've been just experienced about, the Mythos moment. Mythos is potentially very disruptive about, cybersecurity, about critical infrastructures for everybody. And now the Anthropic has launched a project, Goswing, and opened access to a couple of the US sectors and, allied sectors. Yesterday you released a new, announced a quasi-Taiwanese sectors finally be authorized the access of Trend AI, but there's still many questions from the stakeholders here in Taiwan who are managing the critical infrastructures, managing the semiconductor companies. They will question whether there's a possibility for being able to access to methods, and what is the strategy for Anthropic, and how do you navigate this, the disruptive momentum that may come in soon? And do you think, on the other hand, do you think there is a possibility for negotiating or reach out the consensus with the Chinese, or you think the future of the competition is going to be even brutal by each side for keeping developing this kind of disruptive models? What is the future of after the Mythos moment?
Yeah, thank you, and I just want to thank David for just reminding us all of kind of the core strategic reality here, because obviously underlying the discussion we're having today is a view that I think all of us on this stage would share, which is that accelerating the adoption of AI for national security will be really important for hopefully deterring the kind of scenario that David's talking about, or if not, using these kinds of capabilities in some sort of a catastrophic conflict. So I think we have to keep that in mind, and Mythos is showing us what that could look like, both in terms of being able to hopefully shore up defense in cyberspace, but also Anthropic has been proudly in public about the fact that we think the United States government should be able to use it for offensive purposes as well. and hopefully for deterrent effect to begin with. So I think to your question, the intention of Glasswing was to try to manage the fundamental tension between, on the one hand, providing Mythos access to entities that have what we think of as kind of the largest blast radius, the entities that build software on which the world runs, the supply chain for critical infrastructure, while on the other hand trying to ensure that the tool doesn't fall into the wrong hands. And that could be a result of insider risk, that could be a result of cyber attacks as well. In the meantime, we are working very hard on safeguards that would enable broader access to the benefits of Glasswing capabilities for defense using Mythos. And obviously Mythos is just one model. There'll be many more models to come, and very advanced cyber capabilities, even more advanced cyber capabilities as well. So that's what we're trying to do here, is figure out how can we scale access without incurring significant risk. Because unfortunately, I'm very confident that if access were to be gained in the immediate term, Taiwan would probably be on the front lines and on the receiving end of it, which none of us want to see. And all that being said, we're also operating under the conviction, unfortunately, that we should expect China to get access to capabilities like this, whether it's through distillation or other means, in a matter of months. And so we are all operating under the clock for defense. So that's a focus of intense effort right now, is trying to proliferate the benefit while managing that core risk. Now, in terms of discussions with China, is Chris and I had the opportunity to have direct discussions with the government during the previous administration about AI risk. Those discussions were not encouraging. In the sense that we were basically told this is a concern of the United States, and that China was concerned really with just diffusing the benefits of AI. That being said, I don't think there's anything wrong with continuing to have the discussions, but we have to be sober about the likelihood that China will continue to open source some of these capabilities as well, and that's obviously the concern we have right now. So again, I think the fact that the administration is pursuing these talks is a good thing. It's been happening, as many of you know, in Track 2 and Track 1.5 discussions as well. But we should all brace for a world in which we don't achieve agreement in the near term.
Thanks so much, Tarun. I believe this is a kind of a moment that Anthropic is going to be one of the most critical private sectors leading this kind of a policy-making process. On the other hand, I think still there's many of the Taiwanese stakeholders are eager into collaborating with you. So it's kind of encouraging that you're physically here in Taiwan and you attend yesterday's conference and today's conference, and then looking forward to more and more dialogue and collaboration potentially in the future with Anthropic. Thanks so much. Back to Chris. So this is the final part, and we have to wrap up this panel. But Chris, because you are actually the key person, because after chip war, Taiwan finally, you introduced Taiwan, it's so critical, and before Taiwan was kind of maintained the silence, silently keeping manufacturing, but without be identify and notice its importance and its role of a irreplaceable and indispensable partner for the U.S. But from now on, because Taiwan is in the center of this kind of a geopolitical spotlight, and so in the next couple of decades, we believe this kind of a trend is keeping continually. So from your perspective, right, as a historian, how do you identify Taiwan from the U.S. perspective? And what is the ideal strategy from the U.S. Can navigate a better relations between the U.S. and Taiwan? Given Taiwan, firstly, it's very, Taiwan is, from the U.S. perspective, is become more and more dangerous. It's a front line, and it's kind of a front line for especially for the U.S. and China competition. military and geopolitically. But on the other hand, Taiwan's keeping expanding its role for supplying the U.S. Leading AI models, leading AI solutions. So this is a very, very complex dynamic here in Taiwan. But how does the U.S. national strategist and as well as a historian to navigate this kind of relations of Taiwan and the United States?
Well, I often read in the media and hear people talk about Taiwan being dangerous or risky, and I think that gets the causality exactly wrong. The Economist magazine about a year ago called Taiwan the most dangerous place in the world, and I think actually the correct title should have been China the most dangerous place in the world, because when people talk about Taiwan Strait's risk, that risk is coming from one side of the strait and not the other. I think that is centrally important for us to recognize, and we should use the correct language when talking about the source of that risk, because it also helps us diagnose the potential solution. The solution is for China to stop its threats. The solution is for us to increase our deterrence capabilities. And that correct diagnosis of the problem, I think, is hugely important. The reason we're having this conversation now, we didn't have it 30 or 50 years ago, is because China's gotten more powerful, more capable, and more belligerent. Not because anything changed in Taiwan, not because anything changed in the United States. And so that is the historical trend. It's unfortunate that we're in this position, having not bolstered our strength the way we should have the past several decades. But the lesson is that if we want to return to a period when we don't have to talk about Taiwan Strait's risk and supply chains, we should increase our deterrent capabilities so that the risk declines. I think that's centrally important for anyone looking at this problem. I also thought it might be useful to pick up on something that Terry said, which is that Taiwan deserves more recognition. And I think that's right. I think there's a myth I often here in the United States, and it's mirrored by a myth in Taiwan, both among political leaders and I think among journalists. Certainly the US president has repeatedly said that Taiwan has stolen US technology, which is of course historically inaccurate. And I think when you look at the trade data, you see a very different story, which is that US companies see Taiwan as an absolutely central, trusted technology partner. And that's a very important dynamic to notice. And so I would say ignore the tweet and look at the realities of the trading relationship, and you'll find something very important about US-Taiwan relations. There's a mirror image of that myth on the Taiwanese side. I have the privilege of regularly being interviewed by Taiwanese journalists, and most of them ask me, is it true that the US is hollowing out Taiwan's chip industry? And to them I say, look at the trade data. Look at the trade data. There's never been a better time for Taiwan's semiconductor industry. Anyone who thinks that there's a hollowing out happening hasn't been to Hsinchu or Tainan in a very long time. And I think that myth in Taiwan is also very important to dispel because it's, I think, a potent political weapon, but it's also factually untrue. It's just simply patently false. And the dynamics that some of my colleagues have mentioned about the deepening of the trade and manufacturing relationship in the United States and in Taiwan is evidence of the fact that we've seen an intensification of economic benefit to both the United States and to Taiwan over the past several years. And this is, I think, a very good thing. I agree completely with my colleagues who have said it's important that we continue this effort. It's important that Taiwanese firms continue to make known the important role they're playing in bolstering US economic security. We've talked about Arizona and the progress that's been made there on TSMC's facilities. I think there are many other Taiwanese companies that don't publicize their investments to the same degree. But if you watch the trade and investment data like I do, you'll find server manufacturing growing very rapidly in the United States, largely Taiwanese firms playing a role there. If you dig into the bill of materials in an AI server, you'll find lots of Taiwanese firms beyond just the chip makers playing a central role there too. And so in fact, the US and Taiwan are more integrated than ever economically in a way that's benefited both sides more than ever. And so I think this is the key historical trend line from an economic perspective, that the US and Taiwan have become more reliant on each other over time, and as a result they've become more prosperous and more technologically advanced over time, and those things are related. And so I think this is something to be celebrated. It's a benefit to both countries. And I think we should push back hard against the myths that are spun both in the United States and in Taiwan about the downsides of this relationship, because it seems to me there's no more important and no more positive relationship for both countries than the Taiwan-US relationship, both in terms of economics, technology, and also security.
Thanks so much, Chris. I mean, to summarize, Taiwan has been a critical partner for the U.S. geopolitically, but from now on, Taiwan is even more critical for the U.S. techno-geopolitically. And Taiwan has been serving as an engineer state for decades. This is not really good at to have a voice. On the other hand, Taiwan has been so isolated from this kind of global stages for decades. It's even hard. I mean, it's the thing that we have to learn for the Taiwan policymakers and business leaders here in Taiwan. Like this is about the time that we have to learn how to frame the agenda and maybe to create a narrative and to persuade our partners there in the U.S. and our ally countries. But thank you so much for sharing this kind of critical messages in front of our audiences from the Taiwanese community. And thank you so much. We still got a couple of minutes for taking questions from our audiences and participants. So how many minutes was it? Okay. It's around 5 minutes. So maybe just taking 1 or 2 questions.
We now have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
For the
Okay,
QA session.
great. I saw Professor Kim there, right? Professor, maybe.
Hello, my name is Mi Young Kim, and just to give you a context for my comments, I don't have a question, I have a couple of comments though. I spent 25 years at BIS. I retired a few years back, and I teach part-time at Zhengda. I teach a class on export controls, among other topics. So my first comment is to Taiwan. And I spent about 20 years on and off working with Taiwan directly, indirectly on Taiwan's export control systems development. And there's one issue that Taiwan still really lacks, and that is technology controls. Technology controls for export control purposes, not for investment purposes. Technology controls worldwide and not just to China. And this is an issue that I've been talking to Taiwan about in settings like this and directly with the government. You gotta change the law and the implementing regulations. So those of you guys might know the reciprocal tariff agreement. Now you don't have a choice. There's a provision in there that basically says you need to align your export control system to the US's. Which means you gotta control technology. This is what happens when you send advanced technology anywhere, even to the US. Once it comes in, you know what? It requires a license to go back out, including go back out to Taiwan. So think about that. Control your technology. Second, on the for the US, for fellow Americans and people who may have years of people in the current administration, this rollback of export control regulations is wrong-headed just because they were started or issued under Biden. These regulations were put in place to hold back China. That was the main goal. And rolling them back and this AI diffusion rule, affiliates rule, it's just wrong-headed. I have no other word for what the Trump 2 administration is doing. I went through a lot of different administration changes. I have never seen anything like this, ever. And my perspective is a little bit different because I'm a career person as opposed to political. On the
Professor, maybe just focusing on questions.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
thanks
So
so
on
much.
the
I think you should keep going. I'm just.
no. So on the no, this is a request. So on the recognition of Taiwan, is there a way? So it's a question for the Americans. The idea of techno-democracies, Wassenaar is not working because of Russia. So under Biden administration, there was this concept of let's maybe try another type of an organization, not at the political level, but at the implementation level, and gathering of like-minded countries. Is there any movement to revive something like that? Because that's a perfect opportunity to include Taiwan. Taiwan has so much to offer in all technology sector, particularly in electronics. So, question for you, have you heard anything like that? Have you heard about other regulations replace the AI diffusion rule, the affiliates rule? What is happening in the administration related to those? And there are serious BIS operational issues. Maybe you want to talk about that as well.
Chris,
I'll be brief, but thank you very much for the comments. I fully agree, obviously, with everything you said on the question on kind of way forward, but also Wassenaar replacement. There is not a kind of concrete proposal to replace Wassenaar in full. I know that there has been the way of kind of passing regulations that go through Wassenaar, but everyone but Russia. I think that's how some of the quantum computing controls got put through. That's sort of a patchwork approach. I agree that we probably need something more robust in the future. I'll say that the approach that Tarun and I took when we were in was really to kind of just focus on the most discrete issues that were the most time sensitive and pressing, and work with the countries that were the most important for those particular supply chains, just because we didn't think that we had time to, the broader 10, 15-year effort to build this bigger multilateral regime is just not the time frame that we're on with AI right now. We do need to do that, but I think the most important thing is making sure, the United States, Japan, the Netherlands, Taiwan, Korea, the countries that in the semiconductor supply chains on making the chips, making the equipment, are all completely fully aligned on their controls and how they're approaching the China issue, and really have this like national security view towards it. That while industry input is obviously very important, it's making sure that it's not dominating the conversation. The national security view is really kind of driving it. That was our area of focus, and I think where the area of focus needs to continue to be going forward.
All right, so we still got time to take two questions, right? But please manage your question as short as possible. Leland and the gentleman there. Yeah.
Hi, my name is William Young. I'm a senior analyst at International Crisis Group. My question is about, we are currently also witnessing some very powerful CEOs from leading chip companies in the US trying to influence the debate about export controls, especially, naming Jensen Huang. He's been, publicly trying to criticize this. How do you see, the private sector's position on this influencing the current administration's thinking and debate about the export control regime's survival or applicability going forward, especially in the competition with China?
William, you want to identify any panelists?
Happy to take it again. Look, I would say, yes, you're completely right, obviously, that Jensen Huang has had an outsized debate on, or outsized presence on this debate, and obviously his kind of personal relationship with the president seemed like they have very much influenced U.S. policy. I would point out a few things. Look, number one, export controls have actually been like massively beneficial to NVIDIA. The U.S. controls on semiconductor manufacturing equipment are why China doesn't make chips as good as NVIDIA. The U.S. restrictions that prevent Huawei from making chips at TSMC are why they don't make chips as good as those. Actually, the Ascend 910 in 2019, 2020 was actually better than the NVIDIA V100, which is the best chip at the time. So China has shown that they can design very advanced chips, maybe as well as NVIDIA. What they can't do is manufacture the chips because the best place is here. So cutting them off from that actually has allowed NVIDIA to kind of massively benefit. And also, when the controls were first put in place, NVIDIA's market cap was like 1/15 what it is today. They have lost probably exactly 0 sales due to export controls because all of their products are sold out, and they're continuing to be sold out. And Jensen admits this when he talks about anything other than export controls. He talks about how the demand for his product is off the charts and it's insatiable and they're never going to be able to fill all of it. But then when he talks about export controls, he's saying like, well, we have to sell this in order to make more money. It actually doesn't compute. So I think it's unfortunate, and I think, again, this is the reason why we really need analytical, data-driven debates, fact-driven debates on these issues, because they're too important to be left to kind of rumors and kind of corporate interests.
And David, you want to pick it?
I would say just quickly, there's an interesting connection actually between these, the first question and the second question, because I think just one small detail I would quibble with in the first question from Professor Kim is that the motivation for the second Trump administration in shifting off the course that had been set before it is not, I think, in any significant way because these were Biden administration controls. Partly because the Biden administration controls built on first Trump administration controls. And so actually President Trump has a very important quality of parentage for the export controls of the last decade, including those that had the very positive strategic effects that Chris alluded to. And I think that the second Trump administration's sort of reduced emphasis on export control expansion is less a matter of kind of mere, partisan shift and more a reflection of the key point that Chris just landed on, which is that the literacy and the support in policy and in political terms for export controls is shallower than it needs to be given their strategic significance. And I think some of that is improving. You're seeing, for example, a really significant focus by the Congress on a bipartisan basis and in both the House and the Senate to really dig in on these issues, and that's significant. This is partly a response to concern on a bipartisan basis in the Congress to what's happened in the Trump administration's policy over the last year. But I think that it really speaks, this is an honest opportunity to kind of pay tribute again to our hosts, the importance of serious research and useful, understandable argument about the long history and the recent history of export controls, a thing which is really quite obscure, frankly, and as a policy area only a few small number of years ago, is hugely important. So that when circumstances change, when you get a second Trump term where the influence of a company like NVIDIA is obviously greater for understandable reasons, because it's the most valuable company and it's an amazingly accomplished company in all kinds of ways, a person like the CEO of NVIDIA will naturally have the ear of a president. That should then trigger, though, a debate that is informed by a lot of voices, including from industry and including from outside of industry. And having those debates be informed, effective, sharp, informed by think tank research and otherwise is really extremely important if we're going to get this right in the years to come.
Thank you. Do we still have time? No, we don't have time. I'm so sorry, gentlemen. So I do encourage you to directly engage with our panelists. They're going to still staying here for a while. But thank you so much for participating in this session. And especially, I want to show our appreciation for all of our panelists. Again, not only for participating in this session, but also for the long-term support of Dset's mission and the long-term support for Taiwan. And so please give the round of applause for our distinguished panelists. Thank you. I'm looking forward to more collaboration with each of you. So thank you so much. And please stay here and exchange ideas with our panelists and stay here for participating in the next 3 sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now break for lunch. Please take your lunch voucher in the event program with you to collect your lunch. 各位贵宾，我们这次的活动是需要用手册中的午餐券去凭券换餐的，所以如果您没有午餐券的话，就没办法兑换今天的午餐，请务必持午餐券向我们的工作人员兑换餐点。